and Anna called me and said, do you want to co-chair and also be the sponsors of the Met? I was so honored.
What's going on, Jeff? Remember me, the fired Amazon worker that you signed off on the smear campaign?
Didn't they say it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to see the kingdom of heaven? Do you know why? Because biblically they know what the horrible things you got to do.
Now you're going to have the Met Gala where you're going to be surrounded by all these elites and billionaires and A-listers when you have poverty right outside on the streets.
Shame on you, Jeff Bezos.
2 men. Between them, 5 Academy Award nominations, 2 wins, and careers that have shaped Hollywood for over 3 decades. Denzel Washington and Samuel L. Jackson are, by nearly every measure, the most powerful black actors working in the film industry. And they have never once set foot on the Met Gala carpet. Not a single appearance, not a cameo, not even a rumored almost. Now, that alone might not mean much to you. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they just don't care about fashion. But then you start noticing the other names. Morgan Freeman, Forrest Whitaker, Terrence Howard. Men with Oscars on their shelves and decades of institutional pull behind them. Men who could get an invitation with a single phone call and probably already have. Year after year, none of them show up, not one. At some point, a coincidence stops being a coincidence. When the most decorated, most respected, most independent black men in the entire entertainment industry all happen to be absent from the exact same event every single year, that stops looking like scheduling. It starts looking like a decision, a quiet one. The kind that nobody talks about out loud, because in Hollywood, saying the wrong thing about the wrong room can end careers before they get a chance to breathe. So nobody says it. These men don't give interviews explaining their absence. No statements, no press releases, no boycott announcements. They just don't go. And the silence is so consistent, so collective, and so deliberate that somebody finally had to name what everyone else was tiptoeing around. That somebody was D.L. Hughley. And what he said, without once mentioning the words Met Gala, was enough to blow the entire thing wide open. If you know D.L. Hughley, you already know he is not the guy who measures his words against what the industry wants to hear. He is one of the original kings of comedy. He has hosted his own late-night show. He has built a career on saying out loud exactly what powerful people in powerful rooms hope stays private. And unlike a lot of voices in this space, Hughley has never confused access with loyalty. He does not protect the table just because he has a seat at it. Rather have a $50 million wedding to make sure that people can read. They would rather sue the IRS for $10 billion to make sure people have free lunches. Yeah. Evil is as evil does. So what is about those people? When those people align themselves with you, it is transactional for what they... So when Hughley started talking about Jeff Bezos, nobody who knows him was surprised. What he said wasn't dressed up in careful language or walking on eggshells phrasing. He made it plain. You cannot stand on a stage wrapping yourself in the language of civil rights, invoking justice, invoking community, invoking the struggles of Black Americans, and then lock arms with a man like Jeff Bezos. Not without that meaning something. Not without that telling everybody in the room exactly who you are. And here is where Hughley's argument cuts deepest. Bezos dropped a reported $50 million on his own wedding celebration. $50 million for one event. Around the same time, investigative reporters were documenting the conditions inside Amazon's fulfillment warehouses, workers moving so fast, under such relentless pressure that some of them were urinating in bottles rather than risk the time it would take to walk to a bathroom. These are not rumors. These are documented, on-record accounts from the people who built his empire from the floor up. The man spent $50 million on flowers and a guest list while fighting every attempt his workers made to organize for basic dignity. Hughley's point wasn't that this is a contradiction. A contradiction implies that both things can't be true at the same time. But they are both true at the same time. That is the entire point. What he was saying is that this is a confession. When you celebrate Bezos, when you share his stage and his carpet and his honorary chair, you are not making a mistake. You are making a statement. You are telling the world whose side of that equation you actually stand on. And the celebrities who keep showing up year after year, smiling for the cameras alongside men like him, are making that statement whether they mean to or not. You actually did who you actually stood next to and what that actually means. And he is saying it into a live microphone while everyone else is hoping the topic just quietly goes away. But what makes this land even harder is the room Bezos was sitting in when Hughley made his point. Because once you understand what the Met Gala actually is and who has been running it, the picture gets a lot darker than a single controversial billionaire in an honorary chair. The same year Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez were handed honorary chair titles at the Met Gala, New Yorkers were in the streets, not because of some unrelated political moment happening across the country, because of him. Because people understood exactly what it meant to hand someone like Bezos a seat of cultural authority at an institution that has spent decades feeding off Black creativity, Black style, and Black image. The protests weren't background noise. They were a direct response to the decision to plant that man in that chair and call it a celebration. But the protests got swallowed by the coverage. The red carpet recaps, the outfit breakdowns, the breathless commentary about who wore what. All of it buried the fact that a significant number of people looked at that guest list and said out loud that something was deeply wrong with this picture. The mainstream press let it slide, and then they let the next thing slide. And the one after that, because the way this works is that each individual moment looks like it might just be an oversight until you step back far enough to see that none of it is accidental. That is the thing about Hughley that makes people uncomfortable. He does not let you hide behind good intentions. He does not care whether you meant well. He is looking at what you actually did, who you actually stood next to, and what that actually means, and he is saying it into a live microphone while everyone else is hoping the topic just quietly goes away. But what makes this land even harder is the room Bezos was sitting in when Hughley made his point. Because once you understand what the Met Gala actually is and who has been running it, the picture gets a lot darker than a single controversial billionaire in an honorary chair. The same year Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez were handed honorary chair titles at the Met Gala, New Yorkers were in the streets, not because of some unrelated political moment happening across the country, because of him. Because people understood exactly what it meant to hand someone like Bezos a seat of cultural authority at an institution that has spent decades feeding off Black creativity, Black style, and Black image. The protests weren't background noise. They were a direct response to the decision to plant that man in that chair and call it a celebration. But the protests got swallowed by the coverage. The red carpet recaps, the outfit breakdowns, the breathless commentary about who wore what, all of it buried the fact that a significant number of people looked at that guest list and said out loud that something was deeply wrong with this picture. The mainstream press let it slide. And then they let the next thing slide, and the one after that. Because the way this works is that each individual moment looks like it might just be an oversight until you step back far enough to see that none of it is accidental.
Comes from the creatives and the designers who keep this place vibrant. It comes from the hands that stitch the garments, from the people who make every little thing run. And that's why we're here, because labor is art.
Take the dress code. The official theme that year was announced as fashion is art. Clean, broad, safe. The kind of framing that generates good press and keeps the conversation surface level. But pull up the Metropolitan Museum's own website and read the fine print. And the specific language the institution used was focused on the grand scope of Western art. Roman columns, Greek mythology, the full imperial aesthetic, marble, conquest, the visual language of empire. That is what was underneath the polished headline. And the people sitting in those honorary chairs could not have been more perfectly matched to that underlying message if someone had planned it specifically. Because here is the thing about men like Bezos and Elon Musk. They are not subtle about what they are drawn to. Musk literally changed his own social media biography to read Imperator of Mars. Not president, not founder, not CEO. Imperator, the Latin title carried by Roman military commanders before it evolved into the word emperor. This is not a coincidence of phrasing. This is a man who looked at the entire vocabulary available to him and chose the one that most directly signals Roman imperial power. These men are not hiding their psychology. They are broadcasting it. And when you understand that psychology, the ownership mindset, the imperial aesthetic, the deep attraction to the imagery of conquest and dominion, the next question becomes unavoidable. Who actually controls the room they keep showing up to? Because the Met Gala does not happen by accident. It does not run itself. There is a specific person who has sat at the center of that machine for 4 decades, deciding who gets in, who gets dressed by whom, what the theme means, and what the whole event is actually for. And once you understand how she operates, everything else about this story snaps into focus in a way that is very difficult to look away from. 4 decades. That is how long Anna Wintour has been the gravitational center of Vent. 4 decades of deciding who gets invited, who gets seated where, what the theme communicates, and which celebrities walk that carpet dressed in which designers. In any industry, that kind of uninterrupted control is rare. In fashion, an industry that devours its own at a pace most people cannot keep up with, it is almost unheard of. And what 4 decades of leverage actually means, in practical terms, is that the entire ecosystem of magazine covers, film opportunities, brand partnerships, and cultural visibility that orbits the fashion world runs to a significant degree through her. You do not cross that kind of power lightly. Most people in that industry do not cross it at all. Now, here is where this gets uncomfortable in a way that a lot of outlets simply refuse to sit with. The National Review, and understand what that publication is. It is one of the most prominent conservative magazines in American media, not a progressive outlet, not a cultural commentary platform with a social justice angle, not an activist organization with an agenda to push, published a piece that compared the Met Gala to racial segregation. They did not dance around the language. They drew a direct line between what happens at that event and the history of chattel labor in this country. They described Anna Wintour using the framing of a slave owner. Conservative journalists looked at the same room that fashion media was celebrating and said, "This looks like something else entirely." That should stop you cold, not because the National Review is the final word on anything, but because of what it tells you about how visible the dynamic actually is. When people across the entire ideological spectrum, people who agree on almost nothing, are independently arriving at the same uncomfortable description of what they're watching that is worth paying attention to. The specific argument they were making was not abstract. It was precise. Anna Wintour tells some of the most powerful, most famous, this event. 4 decades of deciding who gets invited, who gets seated where, what the theme communicates, and which celebrities walk that carpet dressed in which designers. In any industry, that kind of uninterrupted control is rare. In fashion, an industry that devours its own at a pace most people cannot keep up with, it is almost unheard of. And what 4 decades of leverage actually means, in practical terms, is that the entire ecosystem of magazine covers, film opportunities, brand partnerships, and cultural visibility that orbits the fashion world runs, to a significant degree, through her. You do not cross that kind of power lightly. Most people in that industry do not cross it at all. Now, here is where this gets uncomfortable in a way that a lot of outlets simply refuse to sit with. The National Review, and understand what that publication is, it is one of the most prominent conservative magazines in American media, not a progressive outlet, not a cultural commentary platform with a social justice angle, not an activist organization with an agenda to push, published a piece that compared the Met Gala to racial segregation. They did not dance around the language. They drew a direct line between what happens at that event and the history of chattel labor in this country. They described Anna Wintour using the framing of a slave owner. Conservative journalists looked at the same room that fashion media was celebrating and said, this looks like something else entirely. That should stop you cold. Not because the National Review is the final word on anything, but because of what it tells you about how visible the dynamic actually is. When people across the entire ideological spectrum, people who agree on almost nothing, are independently arriving at the same uncomfortable description of what they're watching that is worth paying attention to. The specific argument they were making was not abstract, it was precise. Anna Wintour tells some of the most powerful, most globally influential Black people on the planet how to present themselves, what to wear, how to perform, how to move through that space. These are musicians who have sold hundreds of millions of records, actors who have defined entire eras of American cinema, athletes whose names are known in countries that have never seen a Hollywood film, people with more cultural influence in a single appearance than most institutions accumulate over years. And they show up dressed exactly the way she decided they should look, walk past the cameras in front of a room full of ultra-wealthy white spectators, help raise millions of dollars for the museum, and go home. Not $1 of that money flows back into Black communities. Not one structural thing changes. The designers whose work gets the most visibility at the event are overwhelmingly not Black designers. The institution being funded is not one that has historically centered Black art or Black cultural legacy on its own terms. The entire mechanism runs on Black celebrity, Black talent, Black cultural credibility, and produces returns that go almost entirely in the other direction. The people who make the room feel relevant go home with nothing but the experience of having been there. And that is the machinery that Wintour has been running for 40 years. A spectacle where some of the most accomplished Black people alive show up, perform, generate the cultural electricity that makes the whole event matter, and then clear out while the real beneficiaries, the museum, the designers, the billionaires in the honorary chairs, collect everything the night produced. You can call that the biggest night in fashion. You can call it a celebration. Or you can look at exactly who is working and exactly who is collecting and call it something closer to what the National Review called it. Either way, the facts of how it operates do not change. And the people who understood those facts earliest are the ones who have never once shown up.
Are making more and more conservative choices and showing things that really are uncritical celebrations of whiteness. Not Europeanness, mind you. Whiteness at the expense of everything.
Before Anna Wintour decided to make Black dandyism her aesthetic centerpiece for an evening, it is worth understanding what Black dandyism actually was. Because the distance between what it was and what the Met Gala turned it into is not a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of history. And if you do not know the history, you cannot see the theft. Black dandyism was born in the Harlem Renaissance, which itself was born out of one of the most brutal periods of legal dehumanization in American history. Black men in this country were being denied the right to vote, denied access to public spaces, denied education, denied the basic legal recognition of their own humanity, and in the middle of all of that, a group of Black men started dressing in immaculate, precisely tailored, commanding suits, not because they had somewhere fancy to go, not because they were trying to impress anyone in the traditional sense, but because they understood something that their oppressors desperately did not want them to understand, that presentation is a form of power, that dignity, expressed visibly and without apology, is a political act. When a Black man in 1920s America walked down the street in a perfectly fitted three-piece suit during an era when the law did not recognize him as fully human, he was not making a fashion statement. He was making a demand. He was forcing a society built on his erasure to look at him, really look at him, and acknowledge, however reluctantly, that he was there, that he was somebody, that he could not be reduced to what the system said he was. The clothing was the protest. The precision was the point. Every pressed collar and every shined shoe was a refusal. That was the weight behind Black dandyism. That was what it cost and what it meant and what it was for. What the Met Gala did was lift the aesthetic completely off the history and hand it to a room full of billionaires as a costume for an evening. The tailoring remained, the sharp lines remained, the visual language of black elegance was reproduced with extraordinary care and significant budget. But the weight, the protest, the defiance, the survival, all of that was quietly removed before the outfit was sent down the carpet. What arrived on that red carpet was the shell of a movement, polished until it gleamed, stripped of everything that ever made it matter. And the people sitting in the audience, the ones who paid tens of thousands of dollars for their seats, got to feel cultured and connected to something historic without having to reckon with a single uncomfortable truth about what that history actually contains. But it did not stop there. Because at the same event where black male identity was being dressed up and put on display as an aesthetic, something else was happening simultaneously that almost nobody in mainstream media paused long enough to name. Black women at the Met Gala that year were being steered through styling choices, through the assignments handed down through Wintour's apparatus toward masculine presentations. Think about the layers of that for a moment. The event is themed around black male identity as a form of protest and resistance, and the black women attending are being guided toward presentations that blur or cross gender lines. Whether that was intentional or the product of a machine too comfortable with its own assumptions to notice what it was doing, the effect is the same. The complexity of black identity, male, female, the full spectrum of it, was being managed, packaged, and presented for an audience that did not build it, did not earn it, and did not have to carry any of its weight when the evening was over. That is what it looks like when a cultural movement gets absorbed by an institution that was never built to honor it. The surface gets preserved, the aesthetics get reproduced, and the meaning, the part that was born from pain and resistance and survival, gets quietly discarded so that the people in the expensive seats can enjoy the view without being disturbed by what they are actually looking at. There is a version of this story where everything described so far could still be written off as interpretation, as reading too much into themes and seating charts and dress codes, as speculation dressed up as analysis. But then you get to the specific incidents, the ones that were documented, photographed, and broadcast to millions of people, the ones that happened in plain sight at the most prestigious fashion event in the world. And suddenly, the question stops being about whether the dynamic exists and starts being about how it was allowed to happen at all.
Now, dandyism has always been about rebellion, challenging societal norms, and self-expression. But here's the thing. Black women has never been fully allowed to even exist in that narrative.
Start with Halle Berry. To understand why what happened matters, you have to understand who Halle Berry is in the context of American film history. She is the only black woman in the history of the Academy Awards to win the Oscar for Best Actress. The only one. In nearly a century of the award existing, one black woman has ever stood on that stage and accepted that trophy. That is the weight she carries into every room she walks into. That is the history attached to her name. And at the Met Gala, the event that positions itself as the pinnacle of cultural sophistication, the room where the most powerful people in fashion and entertainment gather to celebrate artistry, she ended up in a situation that, by any reasonable standard, should never have been allowed to reach that carpet. The details have been documented and discussed. The recording that drew the slave owner comparison called it out directly. And the question it raises is the one nobody in that room seemed interested in answering. How does something like that happen to that woman at that event without someone with authority stepping in and saying no? Then there's the matter of K-pop star Lisa. At the same event, Lisa appeared wearing a garment that featured the image of Rosa Parks on her undergarments. Rosa Parks, the woman whose refusal to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus became one of the defining acts of the American civil rights movement. A woman who endured harassment, job loss, and death threats for the courage it took to hold her ground. A woman whose name and image carry the full weight of one of the most painful and consequential chapters in American history. That image ended up on the undergarments of a performer at a fashion gala. And the entire apparatus of the Met Gala, The stylists, the approvals process, the editors, the people whose entire professional identity is built around the careful curation of image and meaning, let it happen. Escape. Here is the question that neither of those incidents can escape. These things do not happen by accident at an event this controlled. The Met Gala is not a spontaneous gathering. Every outfit goes through layers of approval. Every styling choice is deliberate. Every detail is examined before it ever reaches that carpet. Which means one of two things is true. Either the people making those decisions genuinely believe those choices were acceptable, which strains belief so far it almost snaps, or the people involved felt that saying no carried consequences they were not willing to absorb. Magazine covers disappear, film roles dry up, brand partnerships evaporate, invitations stop arriving. Anna Wintour has sat at the center of that consequence machine for 4 decades. And in an industry where access is currency, 4 decades of leverage is not a small thing. So when you are asking a black celebrity to put on a specific costume, walk a carpet in front of a room full of wealthy spectators, and potentially do something that will follow them for the rest of their career, something they may spend years trying to separate themselves from, what do you call the system that makes that feel like the only available option? What do you call the room where that calculus happens? Some people call it the biggest night in fashion. Others look at the same evidence and reach for very different language. And the men who have spent decades building careers on their own terms, without ever needing that room's approval, seem to have reached their conclusions about it a long time ago.
All the things that have happened that are racist and evil, who's on that Epstein list? Billionaires. Who's protecting them? Billionaires. Why do we not have money for social services? Billionaires. 300, almost a million people are dead right now because they cut off the funding.
There is a particular kind of power move that never makes the news. It does not generate headlines because it is not loud enough to cover. It does not trend because there is nothing to screenshot, nothing to quote, nothing to clip and repost. It is the power move of simply not showing up. And when you look at the names consistently absent from the Met Gala guest list, you are looking at one of the most deliberate, most sustained, and most collectively understood silent statements in the history of American entertainment. Denzel Washington has 2 Academy Awards. He has been working at the top of Hollywood for over 40 years. He has the kind of institutional respect that most actors spend entire careers chasing and never reach. Samuel L. Jackson is, by total box office gross, one of the highest earning actors in the history of cinema. His filmography spans genres, decades, and generations. Morgan Freeman's voice alone is considered a cultural institution. Forrest Whitaker won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his portrayal of Idi Amin in The Last King of Scotland, a performance so complete and so devastating that it is still studied. Terrence Howard built one of the most recognizable careers of his generation before Hollywood's machinery tried to grind him down, and he kept working anyway. These are not men on the fringes of the industry. These are not men who lack the access or the profile or the pull to be in that room. If the Met Gala wanted them there, the calls would have been made, the invitations would have arrived, the offers would have been extended, and yet, year after year, none of them are in the building. No red carpet appearance, no behind-the-scenes footage, no table in the corner where they slipped in quietly and avoided the cameras. They are simply not there. And here is the part that makes the pattern impossible to dismiss. Not one of them has ever publicly explained why. No interviews where the absence comes up and gets addressed. No statements, no open letters, no carefully worded responses to questions about it. In an industry where celebrities issue public statements about everything from film roles to restaurant reservations, the collective silence of this specific group of men about this specific event is not nothing. It is everything. Because in Hollywood, the wrong comment about the wrong room lands differently than it does anywhere else. The consequences are not abstract. They are immediate and they are professional. A quote that circulates, a clip that gets taken out of context, a sentence that the wrong person reads over breakfast. Any of those things can quietly close doors that took decades to open. So you learn the language of careful silence. You learn how to be unavailable without ever being absent. You learn how to send a message without ever putting words to it. These men have been navigating that industry long enough to know exactly how that works. And the message they have been sending consistently, without a single word attached to it, is one that anybody paying attention can read clearly. Escape.
I think all billionaires are evil. I think most are. I do. I don't think all white men are racist. I think most are. And I don't think all men are toxic. I think most are, because I can tell you should judge them by their fruit.
They watched what the Met Gala actually is. They understood what showing up would mean and what it would cost and what it would signal about whose side of that transaction they were willing to stand on. And they declined. Quietly, consistently, collectively, and permanently. Not because they could not get in, but because they understood what getting in required. What it meant to walk that carpet dressed in someone else's vision of who you should be, in front of a room full of people whose interest in Black culture stops the moment the cameras turn off. What it meant to become the mechanism through which billionaires purchase their cultural credibility for an evening and then go back to running their warehouses and their platforms and their empires the exact same way they did before. The men who figured that out are not on that carpet. And the silence they have maintained around it is not absence. It is the clearest, most considered, most unimpeachable statement any of them could have made. Some messages do not need words. Some decisions speak loudest when nobody is talking about them at all. And what everybody in that room is afraid to say out loud is exactly what these men already know, which is why they are not in the room. Strip away every fashion magazine cover. Pull back every breathless red carpet recap, every outfit breakdown, every carefully curated highlight reel that the industry produces in the days after the event. Remove all of it. And what you are left with when you look at the Met Gala without the packaging is a room where billionaires watch Black celebrities perform for their entertainment and their cultural validation. That is the core transaction. That is what the evening actually is when you describe it honestly and without the glamour attached. Black faces on the invitation make the whole thing feel legitimate. Escape. A recognizable Black artist in a striking outfit signals to the world that this event is not just a very expensive private party for the ultra-wealthy. It is a cultural moment. It is connected to something alive and real and significant. The presence of Black talent is what generates that signal. It is what makes the room feel like it matters beyond the price of admission. And in exchange for generating that signal, for providing that credibility, for making the whole machinery of the evening feel like something more than what it actually is, the Black celebrities who show up go home. The money stays, the power stays. The structure that produces the same event in the same way with the same beneficiaries year after year stays completely intact. Not $1 flows back into Black communities as a result of the Met Gala. Not one structural relationship changes. Not one designer who built their aesthetic on Black cultural traditions gets meaningfully elevated by the institution that profits from those traditions. The following year looks identical to the one before it. Same billionaires, same carpet, same performance, same silence in the mainstream press about what any of it actually means. The machine is perfectly calibrated to reproduce itself without ever having to account for what it extracts and from whom. D.L. Hughley was not making a complicated argument. He was not spinning an elaborate theory that required leaps of logic to follow. He was describing something visible to anyone willing to look at it directly. You cannot stand in the language of civil rights and justice and community while your arm is locked with a man who fought his own workers for the right to use a bathroom. That is not a nuanced position. That is not open to significant interpretation. It is a confession, stated plainly, by the choices being made in public, by the people making them. And the ones who got loud and defensive in response to what Hughley said proved his point more effectively than he ever could have done alone. Because the people most invested in protecting a system are always the ones who react hardest when someone names it clearly. The men who are not on that carpet, Denzel, Samuel, Morgan, Forrest, Terrence, they did not need Hughley to say it out loud. They had already done the math a long time ago. They looked at what the room required. They looked at what it returned. They looked at whose power it served and whose image it consumed, and whose communities it left exactly as it found them. And they made their decision without a press release, without a statement, without a single public word attached to it. Because some knowledge does not need to be announced, it just needs to be acted on. And the action, in this case, is the empty space where their names should be on that guest list. What D.L. Hughley did was say the quiet part into a live microphone. What the absent men did was live the answer before the question was even asked publicly. And what that leaves the rest of us with is a choice about how we look at these events going forward. Whether we consume the packaging or we look underneath it. Whether we celebrate the spectacle or we ask who built it, who benefits from it, and who has been quietly, deliberately, and permanently walking away from it for years. The men who figured this out are not in that room, and what they know is exactly what everyone still inside it is hoping you never stop to think about. Think about it.